I'm going to talk about nervous system. We've already talked about the brain, and it has different portions like hemispheres, but we're going to spend most of the time talking about the base unit of the nervous system, which is the neuron. Neurons can send messages. Those are called action potentials. Action potentials work by polarizing a cell. In this case, it's the neuron. They set up this polarization through sodium-potassium pump. If you remember, that's a form of active transport. And then when they depolarize it by opening up these ion channels, then we can send a message down the neuron. Now, when that message gets to the end of the neuron, it jumps to another neuron. And those neurons aren't usually connected. There's a gap between the two, and that's called a synapse. And so a synapse is not a chemical electrical message going through it. It's actually neurotransmitters, which are chemicals. An example I'll give you is GABA. And what those do is send a message to the next neuron. Those messages can either be excitatory, so yes, you need to keep that message going, or inhibitory. No, you need to stop the message right here. And so the synapse gives us a lot of control over that message and what happens when it gets to the next neuron. And so this is a neuron. This is a basic neuron that actually has two different parts. This part up here is going to be the dendrites. Dendrites are going to be, I always use my hand, so if a neuron is your arm, these things up here are going to be the dendrites. It's a regular, got a cell body, but then this portion right here is called the axon. And so most of what we think of as a neuron is called the axon. I don't think I added that here, so that's A-X-O-N. Okay, so we got the dendrites and the axons. If we label some of these other things, this right here is going to be the nucleus. It's a regular cell, so it's going to have all the parts of a cell. This is going to be the cell body, or we sometimes refer to that as the soma. Then this whole thing, I would say from here to the end, is going to be called the axon, A-X-O-N. To speed that, we have it wrapped in this fat material called myelin, and those are actually made of something called a Schwann cell that wraps its way around the axon. And then we have nodes of Ranvier, and nodes of Ranvier are going to be these gaps between the myelin. And really what happens, and I'll come back to that at the end, is that the message actually, it doesn't go all the way through the axon. It's able to jump from spot to spot because we put all the ion channels right here, so it speeds it up. So if you think about a neuron like a wire, it's kind of like that, and then this myelin sheath is going to be like the insulation that wraps around the outside, and it speeds up that message as it goes. At the end, we then have a terminal. What would be next? Well, we'd have the next neuron that's going to be connected right there with a synapse or a gap. We also have organ systems that work together. So the two ones that are super easy to understand, you probably understand, are the respiratory system and the circulatory system. So if we step through it, respiratory system, basically you contract your diaphragm. It increases the volume inside here, and you're going to get a flow of air down in through the trachea, into the bronchi, bronchioles, and eventually to these things which are called alveoli. Alveoli is this very small, thin, wet, moist layer of cells, and basically what it allows is the oxygen that you've breathed in to move into from a high concentration of oxygen to a low concentration within these little capillaries, and then the carbon dioxide to move back out. And so we get this flow of oxygen and carbon dioxide moving back and forth. Respiratory system by itself wouldn't do anything. If that was our entire surface, we would only get oxygen to the cells right around the lungs, and that's not going to help us. And so we have to work together. In other words, the respiratory system now passes that oxygen off to the circulatory system, where it's going to move it through the aorta up towards the head, up down towards the lower end of the body, and it's going to move it all the way around our body. It's going to move that oxygen adjacent to cells, adjacent to the interstitial fluid next to cells, and so it can move that oxygen into cells and move the carbon dioxide out. Remember, it's simply diffusion. The oxygen's always moving from an area of high to an area of low oxygen, and carbon dioxide's moving in the opposite direction, so we can eventually breathe that out. It'll adhere to the hemoglobin within the red blood cells, but if it weren't for these two systems working together, then we wouldn't have a functioning organism. And so all of the organ systems inside our body interact with one another. The system, these two work kind of in a similar fashion. The endocrine system is slow movement of signals, but nervous system is going to be fast movement of signals from one area to another. So if you touch a stove and you move your hand away, before you even realize that you touched a stove, can thank your nervous system for that. Integumentary system is one that kids are sometimes confused with. That's going to be like the hair, the skin, the nails of your body. It's basically providing protection from our external environment. Skin, if I remember right, is the largest organ that you have in your body. Skeletal system is going to be basically for support and protection. It holds us up. We have what's called an endoskeleton on the inside. We can also store ions and nutrients inside some of the long bones in our body. And then muscular system is attached to that skeletal system, so it gives us movement. But it also, part of the muscular system would be the heart, part of that circulatory system. So those are the organ systems. Remember, it's just groups of organs that are working together with a similar cause. And I hope that's helpful.
Hello young scientists, today we're going to learn about the digestive system and what happens to your food when you eat. First of all, you put your food in your mouth and mash it up with your teeth. When you do this, it gets all mixed up with your saliva, the liquid your mouth produces, which helps to break it down. Then, when you've chewed it into a kind of paste, you swallow it and it travels down a tube called the esophagus to your stomach. When it gets to your stomach, the food gets mixed with gastric juices, a kind of acid that helps to turn the food into a liquid ready to be digested. Now that your food is like a kind of watery soup, it goes through into the small intestine, which is a very long tube, and here your body starts to take all of the good things that it needs from the food, like vitamins and minerals, protein and carbohydrates. These goodies go into your blood and straight to your liver, which filters them before letting them go to the right part of the body. The food then goes through the large intestine, which removes the last bits of goodness and most of the water before sending all the bits it doesn't want to your rectum, and you know what happens to those bits, don't you?